This is Simply Lovaii, and you're listening to the expert with a heart.
Welcome to another episode of Simply Lovaii, our podcast series here with the star of the show, Lovaii Navlakhi, who is CEO and MD of International Money Matters Private Limited. Thanks, Lovaii, for joining us on your show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ahalya here keeping you company, and actually Lovaii, today we are talking about a very interesting topic, right, of financial planning that we are going to elaborate on in the next couple of episodes. But to set the stage for everyone, because this isn't an often articulated aspect of financial planning, cross-border financial planning. Now, let's start at the beginning of when this even came into your purview of being a financial advisor and you realized, okay, this is something I need to start paying attention to.
So I started the business in 2001. I went for the first US conference on financial planning in 2004, I think. And at that stage, people told me, oh, you only attended the conference and came back, and why didn't you meet anybody?
Okay.
And I said, oh, really? I should meet people there? And the next year when I went, luckily one of my clients from Bangalore had moved to the US. And he said, if you're coming there, why don't you get in touch? And because of this nudge that, people had said you should meet other people, I said, oh, let me make a grand 5-6 week trip and travel the length breadth of the US, meet people and try and understand what is it that we could do while we were in India about their investments.
Okay.
So when I say that I started off at that time, I think it was just the tip of the iceberg. We knew very little. We realized much later that we knew very little. At that time, of course, you felt you knew it all.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. So it was Indian products, but clients who were living in a different geography.
Okay.
And so how do you help manage that part? So it was purely on investment. And when I asked them in that year, would you consider having me to be a financial advisor on investments in India, their sort of common refrain was, if you will handle the taxes on that investment.
Okay.
So, I trekked back, met up with a few chartered accountants, figured out, okay, yes, I could provide them help, and went back the next year and said, yes, I can do it, but there'll be a slightly higher cost because I'll recover the charge of, the chartered accountants' fees, etc.
Yeah.
That's how it started. So it's been a, long time coming.
So in that period of time, what were some of the biggest challenges that you identified people who had migrated were having, and what were some of the immediate first steps in you dipping your foot in the pond of cross-border?
See, I think one of the beliefs that I had, which was incorrect, was that anybody and everybody could invest in Indian products as long as they were of Indian origin without any worries about differential taxation or worrying about inheritance tax or looking at the currency aspects. And those sort of were things which I felt needed sort of deeper dive.
Okay.
Some of the learnings, or I think most of the learnings actually came from clients there. So you had to start learning terms over there. The first client, I remember telling me that I have invested for my children's education in a 5 to 9 plan. And I said, why only 5 to 9? What happens from 11 to 5?
Right.
So, and I then asked him, what does it mean? Understood that. So the next client I met, I said, oh, so have you have children? Have you invested in 5 to 9? He says, oh, wow, the local sort of jargon or the nuances.
Yeah.
And it started getting comfortable there. But one of the clients at that point, in fact, sent me an article and said that, according to me, I cannot invest in mutual funds in India because I'm in the US and there are some serious tax implications if I did it. And I said, oh, no, there is no way that you can't. I know so many other people who've done it.
Yeah.
And he also told me, yes, but if it was stock alone, I could invest. I said, why would somebody allow you to invest in stock and not in mutual fund?
Okay.
But there is a difference. And I think those sort of realizations, we had to get deeper into the topic and understand why is it that it's allowed, not allowed. So it started with that. But over time, if I can sort of fast forward a bit, It then extended from just Indian products, whether the person was in India or overseas, to Indians now investing overseas, because we understood from financial planning that it does not make sense to have all eggs in one basket, and it just doesn't mean that I have everything in equity or fixed income, but it also meant different countries, different currency investments, so that you made sure that you sort of hedged your risk in a manner. So we started recommending to clients to invest from India outside of India. Choices were extremely limited 15 years ago, and therefore we had limited choices to offer. But over time, what has happened is there has been a greater penetration of Indians investing overseas, whether it's long-term money, short-term money, and therefore the range of products that are available now has just sort of expanded quite a bit. And therefore now we are in a position to talk to clients who might live overseas, have investment overseas, not at all in India or some part only in India, but yet, yes, we can help them with it. And therefore the product, whether it's India or global, doesn't matter. Whether the client is Indian or global, doesn't matter. And then you get the mixture of the sundae, where in the client family, one member is in one country and one is in the other.
Yeah.
And then it gets a little more complicated. The one who's in the other country gets married to someone in a third country. So now there are 3 jurisdictions.
Nice.
And so forth. So yes, it's
that's diversity, Lovaii. We like diverse Sundays.
Yes.
I'm not even a fan of Sundays, but I dabble with that one.
Yeah.
So, I imagine one of the concerns that comes up with investors, especially, in this cross-border situation, is often how to do their retirement planning. And when you're in one country, that in itself is a complex decision because there's so many moving parts. But when you have assets in 2 countries or 3, like whatever, right, the number is, what are some of the key areas of focus for both the investor as well as the financial advisor that they should be focusing on in a retirement planning case for cross-border?
Yeah, so I think while I will answer this question, I think there's one other aspect I would really like to cover, which is taxation.
Okay.
What happens is that when people are investing in 2 different jurisdictions, you need advice in both jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And there are repercussions of what happens in one versus the other. And invariably what I have seen and noticed is that a lot of large entities and large firms who have the ability to or have the presence in multiple jurisdictions, they actually have Chinese walls.
Okay.
And do not allow or do not advise people from one jurisdiction, they do not advise in the other. So the poor client now has to deal with 2 different organizations, maybe the same name, but it is XYZ US and XYZ India.
Yeah.
And the US advice is only to do with the implications in the US. The Indian advice is only to the implications in India. You need somebody who is able to look at, okay, with your Indian investment, this is the implication in the US for you on the Indian investment and vice versa. And that's where we realized that was a big gap in terms of expertise or availability itself. So the ability to tie up with other advisors, other chartered accountants in these jurisdictions who understood both, 2 or in that example I gave you 3 or 4 of them together, becomes very crucial and important. And that then extends to even retirement. So when you're planning for retirement, you're looking at, one, the financial aspect. How much money do I need? Where do I need it? And it's not just a straight mathematical sort of conversion, because the standard of living or the amount needed is different.
Yeah.
The currency movement could be quite different, because when you're planning for retirement, you're planning for a long period of time. So you also need to take into account what's going to happen with currency. And therefore, you might have assets $100 in the US, but you need $20 in India for for your expenses in India. When you're planning, say, retirement, saying, I'm going to spend 4 months of the year here and 8 months there. And at that stage, the issue is also, when is the best time to move the money? Do I move it all lump sum? Do I do it staggered? Do I do in bits and pieces? So I think all of that becomes issues. And this really complicates, and we do have situations where we have Indian couple worked in the US for really long.
Yeah.
And now that they're planning retirement and they say, yeah, I think we are okay with this 8 months in the US, 4 months in India. And it's surprising that as a financial advisor, we have to ask them saying, okay, your son is in the UK and your daughter is in Switzerland. Any time would you want to spend with them?
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, that's just part of the travel. So we look at it as travel, and then to remind them that, you might have grandkids, and then
Small possibility.
And then things suddenly change, and they've not seen that. So unfortunately, I think people look at their sort of situations in life from the window that they are seated at.
Correct. Yeah.
And they don't look at the 360-degree view. And I think we benefit from the fact of having met so many different people. So I'm now suddenly equipped with a 360-degree view. So I can tell you, oh, by the way, when you're looking here, you're missing something here, or, there could be a movement in the other direction. So I think that becomes important in retirement.
It also makes you sound kind of Dr. Strangey, because you can sit in one place and know what's happening or about to happen, no matter where you look.
Yeah, I was thinking of a little more powerful name, but okay, you think Doctor Strange.
Hey, Doctor Strange, you've just offended every Doctor Strange fan out there. But you know what, I just had a question. International money matters, it's kind of prophetic, no, then? Because did you name this before you even got into cross-border financing?
That's a great question. So actually, we started the business as a proprietorship.
Okay.
It was Money Matters. And in 2004-05 is around the time where financially I figured that it would be better to convert it to a private limited company.
Okay.
And that was around the time one of the early trips in the US happened. And I said, if I added the word international to the name, it would probably help in people relating to us and saying, hey, international name, now I'll give you business.
Yeah. That's that Indian in us.
And like you said, I thought the name would help the business. The name actually forced us that, we have to live up to the name.
Yeah.
So in many ways, yes, it does sound prophetic at this point, but it's just coincidental, I would think. Just right place, right time sort of thing.
Yeah, we like those moments though. Those are good moments.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing that I'm sure is going to come up in our upcoming podcast. So we've also got a special guest who's going to be joining us on the series, a dear friend of yours, but also someone who practices in the US. Estate planning, right? When it comes to, again, I can't stress, especially with property, I think we've all seen families sometimes be ripped apart because of property fights and things like that. Estate planning in your own jurisdiction must be so complicated. Then how do you facilitate, seamless and calm estate planning for people who are actually, just all over the place? So
first and foremost, I think estate planning goes beyond just property. It's to do with just the transfer of asset, etc. Now in India, I think it was maybe in the 80s or 90s, there used to be an inheritance tax and it got abolished.
Yeah.
The Western world has it. And therefore people have to be very careful with, it becomes a planning sort of issue of ensuring that when you die, you want your assets to be below the inheritance tax or the estate duty limit so that the family gets the full value of the asset. Now, what happens with cross-border, and I think a lot of people who are listening into this podcast, this might sort of be relevant to them. There are lots and lots of companies which are registered in the US which operate in India as well.
Yeah.
Google, Amazon, Facebook, the types, right? And as you get senior in the organization, you get stock. And people are very happy with some of these stocks. If you happen to own them over the period of time, they've really grown and the company has kept adding stocks to your portfolio. You have the option of buying stocks with your salary, etc. So you keep doing it and say, I'm very thrilled that I have got this $500,000, $1 million in that stock. And what they do not recognize is that the US inheritance tax laws actually have a prohibitive estate duty rate, which is 40%, if your limits are beyond a certain amount. And if you are a US person, a US citizen, it's a much higher limit. If you're not a US citizen, the limit is as low as $60,000. So once your value of such investments in the US crosses $60,000, there is a staggered estate duty that your family pays in case you die while you're holding that asset.
Okay.
Right? And once you cross $1 million, you are at the full 40% tax rate. So people think, oh, I have this great amount of, net worth or asset available. I shouldn't sell it because then there'll be income tax, so let me not do it. Income tax is at least planned, right? You'll incur the capital gain, you'll pay the tax, and then you have the money with you. You can move it back here. The estate tax or the death tax, as they would call it, is obviously unplanned, and the family is thinking, oh, I have a $2 million, and suddenly you say, no, it's only 1.2 million.
Yeah.
So it's a large amount of money that goes away.
Awakening, that's what you call it. Rude awakening.
And different countries have different rules. So, I mean, I know I'm stressing on the US, but just to make the point, because I think a lot of companies which are here are registered in the US, but this applies in many other jurisdictions as well. So one has to be really careful about it and be aware about it. I think there's a lot of learning that we get from experience. So we may not have had a situation till maybe a few months ago of somebody who is a US citizen, has assets in India, has been living in the US for many years, now moved to India, but the daughter is married to a Norwegian and living in Norway. So now there are 3 jurisdictions, and you have to really sort of almost like walking on landmines without getting blown up, and making sure that you are treading carefully, at least be aware about what needs to get done. And very often we find, because of this issue of people dealing with silos, that I'll go to an advisor in the US for my US stuff and in India for my Indian stuff, but they don't talk to each other, that they find that they violated something. And then it's a question of, oh, how do I straighten it up without really, again, pressing the landmine myself and blowing up in my face.
Do not press the red button.
Press, yes, do not press that button.
Amazing. So I think this really sets the stage for the conversations we're about to have with our guest on the next couple of episodes, Lovaii. But I do want to, as we reach the end of today's podcast, I want to ask you a question about the relevance of cross-border financing for people who, may be in one place for now. Is this something that they should think about in their own financial planning journey and plan for, even if it's not happening in the immediate future?
This is a great question, because I think the one thing we tell our clients is that the moment you're thinking about something, if you talk to us, then there is a planning situation.
Okay.
We can actually plan and say, okay, make sure that you sell this asset 1 month before you move to this jurisdiction, because it will be less of an implication. Or make sure you buy this before and then hold it for the next 3 years, then you're fine.
Yeah.
I'm going for, let's say, 2 years assignment to a different country. Then I buy something which I'm going to hold for 3 years, and I have certain reporting requirements, declarations that I do, so that, I've not violated anything, and I'm not paying any taxes, or I'm not, going out of pocket. So I think a lot of that is planning. The same thing is true for people who are outside India and are planning to come back to India.
Okay.
So if they tell us in advance that this is what we are planning, we look at their assets, we look at their aspirations, goals, what needs to move for their sort of expenses, etc., and goals to be met in India, and when is the best time to do it? And, should I break it apart in this financial year, part in the other financial year? And as you're probably well aware, that in different jurisdictions, the financial years are different.
Yeah.
Some have calendar years, some have March, and some have first week of April, and so on and so forth. So there are planning opportunities, arbitrage opportunities, I would say. So not violating anything, but taking advantage of the fact that I can do something in one particular year, one jurisdiction, but it will mean a different year in the other.
Okay. Lovaii, have you had to travel extensively because of your cross-border clients?
No, I mean, I like to travel anyway, so of course.
What is the place that is like the most obscure that you never thought you'd have a client in?
Oh, we've had clients in back and beyond of Africa.
Wow.
But we haven't been there, so we've sort of dealt with them while being remote. Not having been there yet. I think even in a large country, you find somebody in a really quaint pocket and you're able to travel there and see the place. That's great.
Yeah, another reason you should pay attention to cross-border financing.
Of course.
Fantastic. Well, stay tuned for our podcast coming up in this series. It's going to be really special. We're going to be exploring cases, both from Lovaii and our special guests, experience so far. And yeah, cross-border financing. Let's go.
That was an episode of the Simply Lovaii podcast series. Expert with a Heart.